Well, hello, gentlemen.
Morning.
My name is Mark Levesque. I'm with Forest Glory Ministries, and before that, I was a sales rep and a sales manager for an information company, and then I became a pastor. I was a pastor most of the time. I was a salesman, but for 7 years I was full time. Church in St. Peters, Missouri. But I left there to go on the mission field. Initially, I was looking for a way to fulfill the Great Commission because I realized that Jesus said, "Go make disciples of all nations," and I wasn't making hardly any disciples. I was discipling people in my church. But I realized that Jesus wasn't just, making a suggestion. He was saying, "Go make disciples." But I knew that if I could send someone, I got the same credit as the person who I sent, which I really liked that model. Just send someone else, And I was invited to this meeting that Bot Radio was putting on for Forest Glory Ministries. I met Rob Welch, the founder of the ministry, so we ended up having coffee together, and we saw that I could send him and his team, because he told me that they were at $5 a soul. So if you invest $5 in this ministry, all that was invested into that ministry, if you divided what was invested by the number of people who came to Christ, it was about $5 per salvation. And I knew in the United States, we were about $200,000 per baptism in the church here. And so that was a pretty good deal, I thought. And they were going to Africa, so I could send these guys to Africa. They would make disciples on my behalf, and I checked the box. So I started doing that in 2012, and in 2013 I actually went on the board of the ministry, and then in 2015 they invited me to go to Africa with them. I said no because I was working on 3 business deals in the St. Louis area with 3 of the biggest companies in St. Louis, and so I said no. And then within 60 days, all 3 of my projects ended because 2 of the major companies were bought by one by Bayer, one by Merck, and then another one was downsizing from 26 billion to 16 billion. So all this dried up. All the projects we had dried up. So I told Rob Welch, the founder of Forest Glory, I said, "Hey, I'll go away and pray about what I should do." I already knew, but I didn't really want to go to Africa. So I went away for the weekend. Within the first hour, God spoke to my heart and said, "Go to Rwanda and you'll know." And so I told Rob, "I'll go to Rwanda with you." And so October 2015, I was on a plane headed for Rwanda. And I was sitting on the plane, and this pastor from St. Louis, a guy named David Claybrook, who I think I met through Chuck Williams, he said, "Can you train on T4T when you get in Africa at a pastor's conference?" I said, "I can't. I don't know anything about T4T." So he gave me a book. He handed me a book by a guy named Yin Kai about training for trainers, T4T. And so I started reading the book. And I realized I'd been an assistant pastor for 20 years. I'd been a full-time pastor for 7, and I had been pastoring wrong. 27 years I'd been doing it wrong. And that's disappointing when you find out you've invested so much time and you've been doing it wrong. Because when I started reading Yin Kai's book, I realized that he was doing it wrong. The Holy Spirit showed him how to do it right by reading the Great Commission, Matthew 28. And after Yin Kai changed the way that he did the ministry, 3 years before he planted 5 churches in China, communist China. After he changed the way he did it, in just 2 years, he planted 3,535 churches. In the 3rd year, he planted 6,000 churches. And over a 9-year period, he planted 158,000 churches in communist China. And now China has more Christians than any other country in the world. And now T4T, Training for Trainers, has spread over every major continent in the world. And so what I found was that For His glory was taking T4T into Africa. And so on the plane, I realized, wow, if I change the way I do it, I might see some different results. You know? And a couple of things I realized from reading what Yin Kai found was, the first thing was, the Great Commission says, "Go you therefore and make disciples." And Jesus said, "Go." I said, "Come. Come to my Christmas program. Come to my small group. Come to my Easter program. Come to my picnic." I said, "Come." Jesus said, "Go." I said, "Come." I was doing it the opposite of what Jesus said to do. And then we were making converts when we were able to. Jesus said, "Make disciples," but not just make disciples, but teach those disciples how to make disciples, and how to teach them how to make disciples. So just those three things: go, make disciples, and help them how to make disciples. Just do those three things, and it multiplies your ministry dramatically. And so it was a real change for me, but it really got cemented when I got on the ground in Rwanda, because I knew that David Claybrook, Pastor Claybrook, had trained 165 pastors in a city in Rwanda how to make disciples, disciple making. So when I got on the ground, I asked the team there, "You had 165 people trained less than 2 months ago. How's it going?" They said, "Well, we now have 2,500 disciple makers." I was like, in 7 weeks, you went from 165 to 2,500? Wow, T4T was something. But in a very short time, just a couple months, they had 8,000 disciple makers, and then they had 20,000 disciple makers in that city. I was talking to the mayor in that city, and the mayor said, "I don't know what you guys are doing." I didn't know what I was doing yet. But he said, "The jail is empty. People are going back to work and getting out of the bars. The bars are closing. Marriages are being restored. People can stay out late at night." The actual culture of the city, the climate in the city was changing because there were so many disciples of Jesus in the city. And so it's been growing since then. So in October of 2015, we had 165 disciple makers in Africa through T4T. We now have over 4 million disciple makers in groups in T4T. So in just a matter of 10 years, less than 10 years, it's gone from 165 disciple makers to over 4 million in groups. We have over 427,000 groups or group leaders. And so the cost per soul has gone down from $5 per soul to 59 cents per soul. So almost every dollar is invested in the ministry, 2 people will come to Christ. So it's just amazing what God's doing. But we project that in 2025, we'll have 4 more million people in groups. And so in 2025 alone, we will have more people in discipleship groups than we've had over the last 10 years join discipleship groups. So we'll have over 8 million. And it's just growing rapidly that way. Can it work here? I'm glad you were asking that, because after I saw this in Rwanda, I came back to the States and I asked Chuck Williams, a friend of mine, "Hey, can we try this T4T model here in St. Louis?" And he said, "Sure, let's." So we started meeting every Wednesday morning at a Denny's, and it just started to grow. And with Chuck over a ministry called Ministry to Men, and the executive director, Daryl Martin, he had already seen T4T work in the Philippines. With their working it, it grew dramatically, and so Ministry to Men went from about 22 groups that they had planned over 20 years, which is great, but in a year and a half it went to 52 groups by using T4T, by just injecting T4T into what they were doing. So it worked here dramatically. And it's working. Even if you look at Rick Warren's ministry, he has over 10,000 T4T groups under his church. And so everywhere it's been planted and it's been embraced, it bears fruit. And the reason it bears fruit, it's a rediscovery of Jesus's model. and disciple make. It's nothing new. It's just in the first 300 years, the Christian church, the people of the way, they did T4T. They didn't call it T4T, but that's what they did. And they reached the whole world in just a couple of generations. The whole world was reached. We're going to do the same in our generation. Already in this world right now, T4T or Train for Trainers, other ministries are using it. They call it something different. It's spreading all over the world right now. And so my prayer is that in my country, which I love, I mean, in Africa, it's exploding. I mean, we're having 250,000 people a month come to Christ through T4T, just with our ministry alone. I want to see it. I want to see it spread in my country. And so, any pastor listening to this right now, if you'll just inject T4T into your ministry, you're going to see fruit come. You're going to see multiplication. And so, I hope that this is our annual report. It talks about where we've been and where we're going and what's happening now. You can see this. It'll be up shortly on For His Glory website, which is forhisglorymin.org. So you can check this out. You can see the charts that we have. This is the number of disciple makers coming, being made, and the growth, and it's also the number of people coming to Christ. And so you can see what God's doing through this ministry, with this model. It's not about us. It's about the model that Jesus had told us to do. He said, all authority in heaven and earth is given to me. Go you therefore. When we go, his authority goes with us. And he said, go and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to observe everything I commanded you. So teach others how to make disciples. And so that's the Train for Trainers T4T model. And it's working all over the world. It's even working in the United States. And as more and more pastors and ministers embrace it, we're going to see not a revival here. We're going to see a great awakening here, because a revival changes churches and people, but a great awakening changes nations. And we're on the cusp of seeing the United States transformed for Christ. So thank you for this time. I hope you enjoyed this little history of Train for Trainers and For His Glory Ministries. And so this.